Anutaro Purisa Dhammasara Satta Deva Manusanang Buddho Bhagavati Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehi Pasiko Opanayiko Pachatang Vedita Bhovinyo Iti Supatipanno Bhagavato Sapaka Sangho Bujupatipanno Bhagavato Sapaka Sangho Nyaya Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Samyichi Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Yadidan Chatari Purisa Yuga Niyata Purisa Pukkalae Sabhagavato Savaka Sangho Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakshineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Punyaketang Lokasamati. Okay. So as Nitya said, we designed this as a 6-week kind of meeting. We'll meet every Thursday, hopefully, if my health holds up and if there are no technical issues and giving allowance for anicca, we shall be meeting every Thursday over the following 6 weeks. So today we'd be looking at the life of Venerable Sariputta, who is known to be the embodiment of right view, right understanding. Week 2, Mahamoggalana, the embodiment of right unification. Week 3, Venerable Ananda, the embodiment of devotion and service. Week 4, Aya Khema, the foremost of the Buddha's female disciples, the foremost nun, embodiment of renunciation and discernment. Week 5, Mother Visakha, the embodiment of generosity. And finally, round it all off with Anathapindika and right livelihood. So, like I said, I already spoke a little bit about the course design. And what we are going to be talking about over the next 45 minutes to an hour, one of the questions that came up when we were planning this session was, why are we calling this right practice? Okay, or what is the meaning of rightness? So I thought rightness as in Samma, we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll talk about right view. What is the canonical definition of right view? And how Venerable Sariputta's life kind of ties in with that. We'll talk about what led to Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggalana embarking on this search. We'll talk about the start of the search itself, the genesis of their journey, a little note on Sariputta's awakening, and then move on to a few vignettes, a few stories that bring out the personal characteristics and traits of Sariputta that we can look at, be inspired, try and cultivate, reflect upon. Okay, so that's the format for this session. And finally, what the Buddha says about Venerable Sariputta. Okay. So we're all familiar with the Buddha's admonishment or Buddha's encouragement to Venerable Sona, who was a musician. And he tells Venerable Sona, because Venerable Sona was a musician, he uses the simile of the strings of a lute, where he says the balance between effort and ease must be maintained at all times. And hence, the tension must be just right to hit the right note. Ajahn Amaro very beautifully says, Samma is attunement, right? And that's how he defines it. So tuning. And I thought we could elaborate on that a little more. So the first thing is when we say, right understanding, right livelihood, right speech, etc., 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 right samadhi, then is it like a right versus wrong? And first of all, that is not the kind of position that is encouraged, right? So it's not a right versus wrong, but it's a question of balance. And like we said, what is the balance between? Balance is between not being swayed between things that we like and find desirable on one end, and at the other end, things that we don't like and things that we want to avoid. Basically, not going towards bhavatanha or kamatanha on one end and vibhavatanha, which is on the other end, right? So we're always looking at finding the middle path, the balance, and that is an idea that is kind of deeply ingrained in the word samma. And also that it's freestanding. Now, when we look at the worldly dhammas, everything has opposites. Pain has pleasure, gain has loss, praise has blame, praise has blame, so on and so forth, right? But when we look at what is actually rightness or samma in the terms of right practice, right understanding, if you look at the mind states of an arahant, there are no opposites. Everything that there are no affluence, there's no negativity. So all that is there is kusala mula. So when we talk about samma, we are talking also that, we're not talking of opposites, right versus wrong, right view, wrong view, from a position that makes even something as right understanding, it could lead to it being a concretized view. It could lead to the person saying, oh, this is my view and this is absolutely right, and you have a contrary view, that's absolutely wrong. No, it's not. It's freestanding in that it stands by itself, it stands on its own merit, and it is what it is. It is rooted in everything that is wholesome, it is rooted in everything that is beneficial, and it is rooted in everything that is intelligent, however you want to call it. Okay? So that is the basic framework from which the Noble Eightfold Path kind of emerges. Then that's the brilliance of the Buddha, where he doesn't go into opposites, he doesn't go into contention, but he goes into the root of things that are wholesome, beneficial, benevolent, intelligent, etc. So then we speak about the Venerable Sariputta, and Venerable Sariputta is known to have absolutely right view. So how do the suttas and how does the canon actually define right view? It's a very, very simple statement, and this statement very neatly ties into something else we're going to see later on in the slide deck, and when we talk about Venerable Sariputta's life. And so basically, the canon says that sammaditi, right understanding or right view, is only knowledge of dukkha, knowledge of the origin of dukkha, knowledge of the cessation of dukkha, and knowledge of the path that leads to the cessation of dukkha. So again, very, very neatly tied into the Four Noble Truths, which is the core of the Buddha's teachings. So when we take the Noble Eightfold Path, the first component of the Noble Eightfold Path is sammaditi, and what sammaditi points to directly are the Four Noble Truths. So how does it all start? What happens? So we hear about these two friends who are called Upatissa and Kolita, right? And they're lay people. After they ordain, their Dhamma names that are given are Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. But these two are good friends, right? They live a good life. They're generous. They have a lot of morals. They lead an ethical lifestyle. But then they lead the life of a layperson. So they're also into entertainment. So it so happens that at the time of the Buddha, in this place called Rajgir, which is where Vulture's Peak is located, and is very close to Sariputta and Mahamoggallana's village, and this comes directly from the Vinaya Pitaka, they had this 3 or 4 day festival called the Giri Agga Samaja. Now, Giri means mountain, Agga means getting close to, Samaja is like a gathering. So people would gather around this mountain and they'd have all sorts of entertainment. It was like a rave in the 4th century BC. It wasn't particularly wholesome. It wasn't particularly it wasn't rooted in kusala. There's a lot of description about the Giriyaka Samaja in various sources, especially in the Vinaya Pitaka. And Upatissa and Kolita are there and they are participating. They're seeing this. And on day 1, they see all of these shows and dances and music, and they enjoy themselves. On day 2, the same thing happens. And on day 3, they're going for the performances, and Kolita looks at Upatissa and says, "Oh, my dear friend, your face looks a little drawn today. What's happening?" And Upatissa says, "Well, I'm really wondering, we saw these dances and these entertainment over the past 2 days, and we did enjoy ourselves. But then here we are now, it's day 3, and I don't feel that same kind of excitement. I don't feel that same kind of enthusiasm." And then Kolita says, "Well, you're spot on. I'm not really looking forward to this either." So in economics, we call this the law of diminishing marginal utility. But it's, this is the beginning of their quest, of their search in this lifetime. And this is what is referred to as samvega in Pali, in the Pali canon. And samvega is basically a kind of disenchantment with the world. It's a kind of, is this it? Is this all? Is there nothing more? And so when these two friends, Upatissa and Kolita, go for the entertainment on day 3, there's not that much enthusiasm and there's not that much excitement. And then something subconsciously triggers off a memory. saying, oh, we were on a quest, we were on a search, right? It's not all about the world. It's not all about all these worldly enjoyments. So instead of looking at the world, and instead of always persisting in birth and death, let's go and search for the deathless. And so their journey starts. Now, in the Vinaya Pitaka, it says that this Giri Aga Samaja and all of these various shows and activities that goes on there is actually, it forms the basis of the precept that talks about not indulging in entertainment, right? So this is actually one of the origin stories that come up with the rule for entertainment. So then, okay, so now Kolita and Upatissa are kind of agreed that, okay, we should leave the world and we should go in search of the deathless. And they go and they seek various teachers. One goes in one direction, the other goes in another direction. And they come across this teacher called Sanjaya Belatiputta. And, they're very good students. They're loyal. They have devotion towards their teacher. So they learn everything that Sanjaya can teach them. And then at the end, they ask Sanjaya, is there something more? And Sanjaya says, no, not really. This is about all I know, and I've imparted all that to you. So why don't both of you join me as co-teachers and we can teach everyone else? So then Upatissa and Kolita kind of say, well, not really. And they go searching again. And so one day what happens is not yet Venerable Sariputta, but Upatissa is strolling around the streets of Rajgir, and he sees this monk, he sees this ascetic figure, and the countenance of this ascetic figure is that this monk is really, really calm. He's extremely measured. He's extremely poised. He's not in a hurry. Neither is he walking slowly. Neither is he being lazy. So there's this kind of picture of, again, rightness, balance, attunement. And Upatissa is very, very inspired. And this monk happens to be Venerable Assaji. Venerable Assaji, as we know, was one of the 5 original disciples of the Buddha, to whom the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta was preached. And after the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha preaches the Anattalakkhana Sutta, and then by then all 5 of them become arhants. And Venerable Assaji, and they're all going out on alms round, and the Buddha sends them, disperses them to go teach the Dhamma out of compassion, out of consideration for the well-being of the world, for the well-being of people, devas. Teach the Dhamma, go forth and teach the Dhamma, Adi Kalyanam, Madhye Kalyanam, Pariyosana Kalyanam. Beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, beautiful in the end. Lokanukampaya, out of compassion for the world. And Deva Manasana, for compassion for humanity and for beings that are not of the human realm. And so all of these monks are, wandering about, and they go on alms round and they offer teachings. And so Upatissa comes across Venerable Assaji. Just as a side note, it's interesting. Assaji in Pali actually means, in Sanskrit, it's called Ashvajit. And Ashva means a steed or a horse. And Jit is someone who has victory over the steed. or victory over the horse. And this is not a literal horse. A steed or a horse has speed. And so the mind is called the Ashva, because the mind can travel in the speed of lightning. Mind can travel very fast. So Venerable Asaji's name means the one who has conquered the mind. Right? So then Upatissa sees Venerable Asaji. He's very, very inspired. And he says, oh my God, I must go and, Kolita and I have been seeking the deathless. I think this monk has the answer to our quest. So he's very inspired to go and ask Venerable Asaji questions, right? But then he hesitates at the beginning. And he says, well, this isn't exactly the right time. This monk is going on alms round. I shouldn't go and disturb him now. So what I should do is I must be patient. I must wait. Now in the suttas, one of the, or two of the Sappurisa Lakkhanas, or the characteristics of great people, is that they know exactly what is appropriate in time and place. Kalanyata and Matanyata, appropriateness in time and place. And so Upatissa thinks to himself, this isn't really the right time. Let me be patient. Now, this small detail I find extremely inspiring because it shows a level of maturity in the seeker. At this point, he's still a layperson. He's not received the Buddha's teachings, but there is an inherent knowledge of etiquette. There is an inherent knowledge of consideration. There's an inherent evocation of compassion. So he waits for Venerable Asaji to collect his alms. Venerable Asaji collects his alms and he comes. Venerable Upatissa then puts out his own sitting cloth and prepares a seat for Venerable Asaji. Venerable Asaji takes his seat. He finishes his meal. Upatissa provides him water for him to wash his hands. Venerable Asaji washes his hands, then he pushes his bowl aside, and now, he's ready for the question, or ready to ask Upatissa, okay, what's your question? I'm ready to answer it. And this is beautiful because in monastic etiquette, every junior monk is taught how to do all these things, right? So the standard is set way, way back, and we try and follow the standards now. So then he goes to Upatissa and he says, oh, I'm really inspired by you. Who's your teacher and what does he teach? Now, the humility of Venerable Asaji is also really inspiring. Venerable Asaji says, well, I'm quite new to this teaching. I'm not a very advanced practitioner. I'm not a very advanced teacher. Now, this is an Arahant talking, right? And no one else but an Arahant could actually say this. Because even the slightest taint of mana, conceit, can say, oh, yeah, I'll tell you what my teacher says. And my teacher is great. And this is what I've learned from him. And here it is. Right? But Venerable Asaji does not say that. There's absolutely no mana, no conceit in him at all. And he says, I'm a novice to this teaching. I'm new. I'm not experienced. But I can tell you what my teacher teaches. But I'm not going to go into great detail. So here's another really interesting facet of Upatissa. Upatissa then says, Venerable Sir, please tell me in your own words, be it short, be it long, be it detailed, be it succinct. It is up to me to understand the meaning in 100 or in 1,000 different ways. And that's brilliant because right here we see the reflective nature of Upatissa. He says, you just give me the kernel. It's up to me to make what I will out. And this goes directly to what Lumpur Sumedho always keeps telling us, don't search for every answer in the canon. You have to take the teaching and apply it to your own truth. The importance of reflection. After we reflect, we apply. So it's a question of getting an idea, getting a teaching, and then see how it relates to our own experience, how we use it internally. What is the feeling it evokes within us, right? What is the inspiration that we get from it? And this is very clearly represented in the way Upatissa approaches Venerable Asaji and says, be it short or small, it's up to me to and analyze it, to reflect on it, to dwell on it in 100 or 1,000 different ways, and for me to realize the own meaning by myself. And Venerable Asaji says, well, the teaching of my teacher, the Tathagata, the Buddha, is simply this, that everything in this world has a cause and everything has an end. And for the cause, the Tathagata has, and for the birth, the Tathagata has described the cause. And for the cessation, the Tathagata has also described the cause. That's all Upatissa says. That's all Asaji says. And as soon as Upatissa hears this, the canon says, the suttas say that the first 3 fetters fall away. And he enters the stream. So it's very, very, personally, I find it really inspiring. And right through the suttas, we see all of these different narratives of many, many people listening to one discourse of the Buddha, or listening to one discourse of Sariputta, and then gaining or reaching a place of understanding, letting go of certain fetters and certain hindrances. And that is kind of really, it highlights how they take the teaching, they reflect on it, and they apply the teachings to their own practice and to their own kind of whatever struggles they're having, whatever obstacles they're facing, and so on. Okay? So that's the genesis. So then Upatissa gains a certain very, very deep level of understanding from which he can never regress. And he says, okay, thank you so much. Please don't say any more. I've made a pact with my friend. And I've got to go and tell him that I found the source of the depths. So again, speaks of his loyalty, speaks of his generosity, his spirit of concern for this Kalyana Mitta that he has. And by having concern for his Kalyana Mitta, he himself becomes the ultimate Kalyana Mitta. And we'll see that later on. But then he goes and he finds Kolita and says, Kolita, I have found the deathless. Let's go and realize the deathless by listening to the teacher. So they respectfully take leave of Sanjaya. Sanjaya is really upset because these two are his star students. And when Upatissa and Kolita are there, Sanjaya's monastery or his ashram is kind of thriving. Lots of monks, lots of offerings. And then when Upatissa and Kolita leave, a lot of the other seekers leave with them, saying, okay, these two are star pupils. They're really worthy of respect and veneration. If they say they found the deathless, we are going to go with them. And we're going to find what they found. So then Sanjaya Belatiputta's monastery empties, and there's descriptions about how he gets so angry and he vomits hot blood because of the amount of ill will and envy and jealousy and anger that he finds. So then what happens is Upatissa and Kolita go to the Buddha, and they are soon ordained. And they get the names Sariputta and Mahamoggalana. We'll talk about Mahamoggalana's awakening next week. But then what happens is, after their ordination, Sariputta stays with the Buddha. And it's now been 2 weeks. During these 2 weeks, Sariputta has put in a lot of work. He's been practicing diligently. He's living a life of renunciation. He's taken the teachings to heart. He's also very devoted. Now, at this time, Venerable Ananda doesn't come into the picture. So Venerable Sariputta is probably attending to the Buddha's personal needs. And so one day, what happens is Venerable Sariputta's nephew, an ascetic called Diganaka, long nails, quite literally, he comes to visit Sariputta, and Sariputta says, well, you got to go listen to the Buddha. And he goes, and the Buddha gives him a teaching. And Sariputta is just, in some accounts, he's standing behind the Buddha. In some accounts, he's sitting behind the Buddha. But he's just sitting or standing, whatever. He's behind the Buddha, and he's fanning the Buddha. And while he's fanning the Buddha, he's listening to what the Buddha is telling Diganaka. And as he's listening, all the cankers fall away, and he reaches perfect understanding. Now, in many suttas, there's a lot of description about how Sariputta's enlightenment happens, right? Like he goes into the 4 jhanas, then he dwells in all these different types of knowledges and understanding. And it's explained with a lot of detail. But then what's interesting is what Venerable Sariputta himself says about his own awakening. And this is found in the Sariputta Theragatha, which is in the Theragatha collection. And he says, the Blessed One, the Buddha, the seer, was teaching Dhamma to another. As he taught the Dhamma, I lent an ear to get the meaning. My listening wasn't wasted. I'm freed without defilements. And then he goes on to say, his shelter is the foot of a tree, head shaved, robe clad, the elder foremost in wisdom, Upatissa abides reflecting. He's talking about himself. And he admits that he is the elder foremost in wisdom, but he abides reflecting. Abiding without thought, the Buddha's disciple, noble and silent, is blessed with release. So at this moment, the way Sariputta describes it, it seems that the sense of doing, or the sense of actively seeking, actively doing something, is not present at all. It seems to be a realization. It seems to be spontaneous. It seems to be, though there's a lot of preparatory work that's gone on over the past weeks and before that over past lifetimes, At this moment, there's this emphasis on silence. There's this emphasis on abiding without thought. And there's this emphasis of listening. There's this emphasis of being open, being available, as Ajahn Sucitto says, open and available. And as Luang Por V says, being absolutely present. Right? He's present, he's abiding without thought, he's silent, and he says he's released. So I just want to present this to you, and then you can reflect upon how it sits with you. Contrasting to all of the suttas which describe how he got there in great detail, there's something about just being present, just being available, just being aware, just being silent, and then allowing things to arise and witnessing the cessation of things that are already present. So now we talk about, let's switch gears a little bit. And let's see how the suttas describe Venerable Sariputta's role in the Sangha. So Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggalana are called the Aggasavakas, the foremost disciples. And in most, if not all Theravadan depictions, Sariputta sits to the Buddha's right, Mahamoggalana sits to the Buddha's left. Sariputta is the foremost in wisdom and understanding. He's also called the Dhammasenapati, or very neatly translated in English as the marshal of the Dhamma. So this isn't a kind of militaristic term. A marshal kind of understands what's needed of the army. He then organizes the army. He arranges the army, sets forth a strategy, and then watches what the army does. Venerable Sariputta's role is very much the same, in that he takes the teachings of the Buddha and he constructs the Matika, which later became the Abhidhamma. And the story goes that the Buddha is up in Tavatimsa heaven teaching the Abhidhamma to his mother and to the Devas. And then every evening he would come down and teach the Venerable Sariputta. And that's how we got handed, that's how the Abhidhamma Pitaka was formed and things like that. But before that, Venerable Sariputta, his main area of interest is he wanted to take the teachings of the Buddha and organize them in a particular format that would be easy to memorize, easy to reflect upon, easy to understand, and easy to apply. And there's also a description in the suttas that if there was a question that none of the monks living with the Buddha could answer, Mahamoggalana could answer those questions. And if there were any questions that Mahamoggalana couldn't answer, the Venerable Sariputta can answer those questions. And when we read the suttas and we read the Udana and we read the Itivuttaka or Dhammapada, in all of these sources, the one person that the Buddha praises really generously and over and over and over again is many times the combination of Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggalana, and very often Venerable Sariputta by himself. And because of all of these factors, he's known as the marshal of the Dhamma, the Aggasavaka, the closest disciple, the disciple foremost in wisdom. And the Buddha also makes him a preceptor. So originally, the Buddha was ordaining monks himself. Later, when the two chief disciples come to him, he delegates that duty to them. And so Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggalana start ordaining bhikkhus who come to seek the teaching. So much so, as represented in the picture there, the Buddha's own son, Rahula, is ordained by Sariputta. The Buddha doesn't ordain him himself. Venerable Sariputta ordains him. So he's a preceptor, and he's also known to be an exceptional caregiver. Many, many stories in the suttas about how Venerable Sariputta tends to the sick, to the infirm, how he cares for really, really young members of the Sangha and very, very old members of the Sangha, how he goes into sick rooms and hospitals and he takes care of patients, monks who are sick. So much so that when the Buddha is on a journey going somewhere and the whole Sangha is following him, instead of walking to the Buddha's right with a caparisoned umbrella like a Dhammasenapati should, Venerable Sariputta follows right at the very end, caring for those who are lagging behind, caring for monks who can't keep up with the pace, caring for the really young, the really old and infirm. When they're all living in a monastery, when all the monks go on alms round, Venerable Sariputta stays back. He cleans the monastery. He sweeps areas that need to be swept. If there is anything out of place, he puts all that in place, right? And just so that anyone who visits the monastery shouldn't get the idea that, oh, this monastery is not well kept. Again, something that Lumpo Cha, Lumpo Sumedo, Lumpo V, Lumpo Pasano, all are great teachers in our Sangha. And that's the hallmark of a real forest monastery. The first thing that strikes you when you enter a forest monastery, especially in our Sangha, is how orderly it is, how clean it is, how much care goes in. It's not a question of being compulsive or being obsessive. It's a question of care. It's a question of love. It's a question of responsibility that comes to taking care of material things that are offered to the Sangha. So all of these things were exemplified by Venerable Sariputta. And very often he's described as the perfect teacher and as the perfect friend. We'll come to the picture and the story in a bit, but first of all, time and time again, when we read various suttas where the Buddha talks about Sariputta, the sutta always emphasizes how patient Sariputta is. So if a disciple had a question, the suttas say that he wouldn't hesitate to answer that question 100 times or 1,000 times, repeatedly, right? He was a teacher with sharp perception, but at the same time, very warm human interest. So he was able to guide students individually. It wasn't that he had like a one-size-fits-all teaching. You know, he would look at the student, he would understand what their problems are, he would allocate an object of meditation that was really suited to their mental capacities, and he would encourage them to progress in the Dhamma. And in one place, the Buddha says, Venerable Sariputta is like the mother who gives birth, and Venerable Moggallana is like the nurse who raises the child. And this is because Venerable Sariputta, again, because of the third point there, encouraged reflection. He would take on a student And he would guide the student very patiently, answering the student's questions 100 times or 1,000 times, till that student achieved stream entry, till that student reached a certain level of understanding where 3 of the initial fetters fall away. And then he would say, okay, now it's time for the student, by his own effort and by his own reflection, to make his way further. So he wouldn't handhold any of his students. He'd teach them the basics, he'd get them up to a certain level, and then he'd say, okay, carry on. Now you've got to take care of yourself, because he knew that they couldn't regress. The understanding was so profound that they couldn't regress any further. Mahamoggalana, on the other hand, would take his students right up to complete understanding, right up to complete disappearance of all their affluence. Right? And we'll talk about how next week we'll do a little contrast about the enlightenment experience of Sariputta, the enlightenment experience of Mahamoggalana, the teaching style of Sariputta, the teaching style of Mahamoggalana. And the style of teaching really brings out certain personalities that are not very, very evident. Or at least this is just my understanding of it that I would like to share with you. He also provided personalized instruction, right? Again, depending, even though the suttas very often say that Sariputta would take his students up to stream entry and then allow them to progress, there are cases of monks like the Venerable Anuruddha, the Venerable Lakuntika Baddiya, who come to Sariputta having a certain level of understanding. And then Venerable Sariputta helps them to reach full understanding, the full release of their cankers, full release of their affluence. So takes them all the way. So it's not that he would just take people up to stream entry and leave them there. Depending on the person who would come to him, he would approach it from a very personalized angle and provide instruction, keeping in mind the level of the student, their individual problems, their individual points of view, etc., and guide them the right way. And of course, he was extremely renowned for not just his understanding, because he would teach a lot, he would guide people a lot, but in his own conduct, in his adherence to the Vinaya, in his maintenance of the life of a renunciant, the spirit of the Vinaya, intention, all of these were given a lot of emphasis. And so he was, just like how we described the Buddha, right? Perfect in conduct and understanding. Vidya Charana Sampanna. Venerable Sariputta was very much the same. Perfect in conduct and understanding. So the picture here is quite a touching story. And the little novice and the monk obviously is Venerable Sariputta. The little novice sitting in front of him is a novice called Pandita. Pandita became a novice at the age of 7. And he goes out on alms round with Venerable Sariputta. And as they're walking on alms round, he sees a farmer kind of cutting a little channel for water to flow and irrigate his field. A little further on, he sees a blacksmith making an arrow. A little further on, he sees a carpenter making a wheel. And then he asks Venerable Sariputta, "Oh, Venerable Sir, all of these things, water, these bamboo shafts and these pieces of wood, they have no consciousness, but can they be guided?" And Venerable Sariputta says, yes, of course they can be guided. And so this little novice then says, oh, I have a human birth. I have this human capacity of understanding. I have this quality of awareness. If all these inanimate objects can be guided, surely I can be guided too. So he hands over his robe and his bowl to Venerable Sariputta. And he says, sir, please excuse me. I have to go back to the monastery and I have to reflect on this teaching and I have to practice. And he goes back and he practices. And the story goes that he attains full, complete understanding by the noon of that day. The most beautiful part of the story is Venerable Sariputta doesn't just say, okay, you go back and you practice. Venerable Sariputta continues on his alms round, has his bowl filled with alms, and has his student's bowl filled with alms, comes back and presents alms to the student, who is now eligible to receive these alms in its completeness. He is now fully worthy. He is a worthy recipient of alms food. And this very famous 4-line verse is from there. Irrigators govern waters, fletchers fashion shafts, as joiners shape their timber, those of good conduct tame themselves. So this is found in the Dhammapada. It's also found in the Pandita Sutta, which is, I think, in the Majjhima Nikaya. So again, a simile that is used very often, and this is the origin story for that. Okay. Ooh, I'm going slow. Okay. I should pick up the pace. Okay, so like we said, there were some monks who would go to Venerable Sariputta already with a certain level of understanding. And one of those monks was Venerable Anuruddha. So one day, Venerable Anuruddha goes to Venerable Sariputta and he says, you know, Venerable, I have the divine eye. I can see the divine eye. Using the divine eye, I can see things that have happened in the past, things that are happening in different locations, etc., etc. My body is tranquil. My mind is calm. But at the same time, I have not been released from my cankers. So then Venerable Sariputta looks at Anuruddha and tells him, it'll be good indeed if the Venerable Anuruddha, abandoning these 3 states of mind, paying no attention to them, will direct the mind to the deathless element. So he tells Venerable Anuruddha, look here, Venerable, when you say that you have the divine eye and you tell me how you employ the divine eye, there is a level of conceit there. When you say that your body is tranquil and your mind is at ease, just that thought shows a level of restlessness. And the fact that you think that in spite of all this, I have not yet been released from all my cankers shows a level of worry. So avoid these 3 mind states and direct the mind to the deathless element. Again, an encouragement to reflect, an encouragement not to crowd the mind with thought, with worry, with restlessness. Go beyond that and allow whatever comes up to come up. It's like this, and it all belongs. So a few short stories. Venerable Sariputta, what kind of person was he? Right? There are all of these descriptions about how he attained awakening, all of his teachings, how he coded the Abhidhamma, etc., etc. But these are 4 stories that really spoke to me and continue whenever I come across them, really speak. First of all is the story of how Sariputta could never get angry. So the story goes that one day he was going on alms round. There were all of these lay people sitting and talking there, and they were saying, "Oh, Venerable Sariputta is so great; he can never be angered." The story goes that there was a Brahmin there who was listening, and he says, "Oh, who said he can never get angry? Maybe he's never gotten angry because no one has provoked him. So I'll provoke him and I'll show you guys." So as Venerable Sariputta is walking on alms round, this Brahmin goes behind him and gives him a blow on the back. Venerable Sariputta is so equanimous, he just continues walking. His pace doesn't change. He doesn't turn around and see what's happened. His focus is unshifted, just continues. And as he continues walking, this Brahmin realizes, "Oh my God, what have I done?" So he falls at Venerable Sariputta's feet, asks for forgiveness, and requests Sariputta to come and take alms at his residence. Venerable Sariputta happily agrees, goes, and as he approaches this Brahmin's house, there's another group of people that collect, and they say, "Oh, we're going to bash this guy up. He's been so disrespectful to Venerable Sariputta. He's physically harmed him. So we're going to give him what he deserves." Venerable Sariputta looks at them and says, "Well, did he strike me or did he strike you?" And they say, "Well, Venerable Sir, they struck you." So he says, "Well, I've forgiven him. It's between me and him. It's over. Go your own way. Be happy. Don't worry, be happy." Right? And Venerable Sariputta disperses them, goes, takes alms, and the Brahmin, this beautiful resolution to this story. The picture at the bottom is actually Venerable Sariputta teaching his mother Rupasari. Now, as it happens with a lot of monastics, their parents are not very happy when monastics renounce. So Venerable Sariputta's mother, Rupasari, was not happy at all, because Upatissa, Venerable Sariputta's lay incarnation, came from this really, really high-born, very wealthy family. And when Sariputta decides to become a mendicant living on alms food, his mother just can't reconcile. She takes it very personally. She feels very betrayed. He's not fulfilling his duties as a son. He's not taking care of the family's wealth. He's not providing the family with progeny. The lineage can't continue. Family can't continue. All of these are very important things in India, even today. So in those days, they were primary importance. So she would always keep belittling him. So now it's time for Sariputta to pass on. He goes, pays respects to the Buddha, and he says, "Okay, now I've got to go and teach my mother the Dhamma. And before I pass away, I would like to see that she's set on the proper path." So then he goes there, and Rupasari allows him to come in, allows the retinue of monks to come in. She makes really snide remarks. She says, "Oh, you shaven-headed one, you eater of leftover food, come, sit down and eat." And then she looks at Venerable Sariputta's students and says, "Oh, you guys are the guys who's made my son like this." And so she's very, very disrespectful. Yet there's not a tinge or a trace of resentfulness in Sariputta. Sariputta takes the alms food. He's just waiting for the right moment. Right? Patient endurance. This kind of being reviled by one's own mother, very, very difficult to, and in public, in front of his own students. But nothing moves him. He just goes into his room, He's resting. And as he's resting, the four great kings come down from the heaven realms, Chatur Maharajika. They come and pay respects to Sariputta. Now, Rupasari is witnessing all this. Then then they leave. And then Rupasari comes and asks Sariputta, "Oh, my son, who were these four beings that came? They looked so splendorous. They looked so resplendent." So Sariputta says, "Well, they were the Chatur Maharajika. They are the four great kings." So Rupasari says, "Well, are you greater than them?" Venerable Sariputta says, "If my teacher is in a temple, these four are the temple attendants. They attend to my teacher, and I am my teacher's student." After the four great kings leave, Sakka, the king of the Devas, he comes, he pays respects. Rupasari asks, then he leaves. Rupasari asks Sariputta the same thing. Who's he? Sariputta says, "Well, that's Sakka or Indra, the king of the Devas. He came to pay respects." And Rupasari says, "Oh, are you and your teacher greater than him?" He says, "Well, if the Chatur Maharajika were temple attendants, Sakka is like the novice who carries the bowl and the robe of the monks." And then there's this really, really splendorous being who comes after Sariputta leaves. And Rupasari says, "Who's this?" And Venerable Sariputta says, "Well, this is the god or the deity you've been worshipping all your life. This is Mahabrahma himself." And the moment Rupasari sees Mahabrahma there paying respects to her son, she realizes the greatness of the Buddha's teachings. She realizes the wonderful life that Sariputta has lived, all the goodness that surrounds him. And she changes her ways, pays respects, and actually laments, saying, "Oh, all these years I reviled him. All these years I was rude to him." But just before his Mahaparinibbana, Venerable Sariputta sets his mother on the right course and thereby releases himself from the debt he owed his mother. Gratitude is again one of the most beautiful qualities of Venerable Sariputta. Even after becoming the chief disciple of the Buddha, Venerable Sariputta held Venerable Assaji in his heart with so much reverence and so much respect, because he came across the Buddha's teachings because of Venerable Assaji. So if he was staying in any particular monastery and Venerable Assaji was in that monastery, he would first go and pay respects to the Buddha, then he'd go and pay respects to Venerable Assaji. If Venerable Assaji was staying in another monastery, Venerable Sariputta would go and pay respects to the Buddha, then face the direction in which the monastery is where Venerable Assaji resides, and he would pay respects to Venerable Assaji in that direction. And so some of the monks saw this, and jealousy works in mysterious ways. So they went and complained to the Buddha, saying, "Oh, Venerable Sariputta is still behaving like a Brahmin. He pays respects to the cardinal directions, and you call him your foremost disciple. He's still clinging to these old views of his." And the Buddha then says, "Please, you're misunderstanding him. This is the level of gratitude that he has, that he recognizes that he came to me because of Venerable Assaji. So wherever Venerable Assaji is, he'll face that direction and pay respects." And the final vignette, the final story, is Venerable Sariputta's humility. So one day when he's going on alms round, there's this and he probably got ready in a hurry. So as he's leaving, the lower end of his inner robe was trailing. And this, according to the Vinaya, is not proper appearance for a monk. Right? So the novice looks at Venerable Sariputta and says, "Oh, Venerable Sir, your robe, you're not wearing your robe properly." Right? Venerable Sariputta turns around, adjusts his robe, puts his hand in Anjali, and says, "Oh, my teacher, is it okay now?" Right? That is the level of humility of Venerable Sariputta. So these are some of the stories that were that are very, very touching. So finally, as we said, the Buddha is very generous in his praise for Sariputta, and rightly so. So there are these two pieces that really struck me. One is what the Buddha says when Sariputta has just become enlightened during his awakening. And the second one is what the Buddha says when Venerable Sariputta passes away. Now, these are just excerpts from the suttas, so they're not in exactly the same order as they appear in the sutta. So when Sariputta has attained awakening, the Buddha says, Sariputta is astute, monks. He's possessed of wisdom that's great, widespread. He's humorous, wisdom with humor, wisdom that's swift. He's quick-minded, he's sharp, and his wisdom is penetrating. So it's not this kind of personality that's always analyzing things and this personality that's kind of dour. Or, we've seen examples where he's so compassionate, perfect teacher, he's the perfect friend. Along with that, the Buddha says he's also humorous. He has wisdom that's swift and sharp and penetrating. And if there's anyone of whom it may be rightly said that they've attained mastery and perfection in the noble ethics, in immersion or in collectedness, in wisdom and freedom, Sariputta. Right? So the Buddha looks at this disciple of his and he sees this kind of perfect, he sees a collection of qualities that are actually perfect. Right? And this is what he says in praise of this disciple. Finally, Venerable Sariputta, when he passes on, Sariputta has a brother called Chunda, not Chunda the goldsmith. This is a different Chunda. Not Ajahn Chunda from Abhigiri. So Venerable Sariputta's Mahaparinibbana and his brother Chunda is attending to Venerable Sariputta. And Venerable Sariputta passes away. So now it's Chunda's duty to convey this message to the Buddha. So he goes to where the Buddha is residing. Venerable Ananda is the Buddha's attendant. So instead of going directly to the Buddha, Venerable Chunda goes to Venerable Ananda and conveys the news. Ananda is heartbroken because Ananda and Sariputta have been very, very close friends. There are numerous stories where Venerable Ananda would receive these beautiful, gorgeous robes, and he wouldn't wear them. He'll keep them and wait for Venerable Sariputta to come, and he will offer those robes to Venerable Sariputta. There are numerous occasions where novices who have been ordained by Venerable Ananda were later sent to Venerable Sariputta for further training. Venerable Sariputta would send his novices to Venerable Ananda for training. They had this beautiful, beautiful relationship. Venerable Sariputta was so grateful to Venerable Ananda because Venerable Ananda was taking care of the personal needs of the Buddha. Venerable Sariputta said, he is doing a great service to the entire Sangha by taking care of our teacher. So Ananda is kind of really sad that Venerable Sariputta has passed away. So he goes to the Buddha and he says, Venerable Ananda has passed away. I feel really, Venerable Sariputta has passed away. I feel really, really sad, and my mind is all clouded and confused, and my heart is heavy. And so the Buddha says, well, haven't I told you that everything that has birth has an end? How else can it be? Suppose there were a large tree standing with heartwood, and the largest branch fell off. In the same way, in the great Sangha that stands with heartwood, Sariputta has become fully extinguished. So the Buddha says that in this huge, large tree, Sariputta is the largest branch. So Ananda, live as your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Let the teaching be your island. Let the teaching be your refuge and no other refuge. There's another very beautiful verse that is used a lot for reflection, for contemplation. Attadipa viharata, attasarana ananya sarana, dhammadipa viharata, dhammasarana ananya sarana. So let the teaching be your island and be your refuge. And he says, if someone has lived this way, it's the Venerable Sariputta. So here's a list of references. So I'm sorry, it's about 8:15. We have only 15 minutes for questions. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for your patience. And it's open for questions.
Thank you, Ven Amarasiri. This is wonderful, wonderful teaching. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll help unmute yourself.
So, Nitya, you'll
Yes.
take care of that. If anyone raises their hand, you'll.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
I will. Yeah.
Please.
No one seems to have a question at this point.
Probably bored the daylights out of everyone.
Janice?
Janice. Janice, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I definitely was not bored. It was beautiful. That was, you know, it really, I don't know. I just felt like I was like able to kind of enter the world of these original disciples of the Buddha, how it was. It was really lovely. I enjoyed it. And I learned a lot. So thank you so much. And I wanted to ask you about the word extinguished with the parinibbana, because I really feel confused about the whole parinibbana event. I don't know what to call it. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about this word extinguished.
Sure. There's the sutta called the Vachagota Sutta, where Vachagota goes to the Buddha and says, what happens to an arahant when he dies? So the Buddha says, Vachagota, your question is not formed properly. And the Buddha asks Vachagota a question in return. He says, what happens to a flame when it's extinguished? Does it go up, down, east, or west? Which direction does the flame go? So Vachagota says, well, if a flame is extinguished, it's extinguished. It doesn't go anywhere. So the Buddha says, in that same way, because there's no more fuel, there's no more karmic residue for the Arahant. The Arahant has let go of all attachments, let go of all desires, let go of all affluence. There's nothing there that allows this being or this consciousness to manifest in another form. And because of this lack of fuel, lack of karmic tendencies, lack of desire, just as a flame, like if you take an oil lamp and the oil goes away, the flame just goes away, right? The same way, the flame goes away. So this is the kind of simile that's used for extinguishing.
That's that's a excellent description, and I've heard it before, and it's just really hard for me to get my mind around it, right? So I'll just
these things, a lot of these things I don't think we can come to intellectually. These things, I suppose, when it happens, knowledge will arise, I suppose. But there are a lot of things that Buddha says we shouldn't really ponder about too much. But we can see in our own lives how desire causes birth and rebirth. And anything that is born has to die. Anything that dies, if there's a residue, will be born again. So it's a nice thing to keep in mind. It is difficult to reach an experiential, complete, full understanding until it happens. So I'm in the same boat as you. I haven't experienced it. So this is all I can share. And I hope that's helpful.
It really is a beautiful simile, though, isn't it? With the image of the fire going out. Because, it just reminds me of a little something that happened to me where we had a barbecue and we thought it was when, years ago when we used to use the coals on a barbecue, and we thought the coals were finished. They'd totally gone out, like extinguished. And so we dumped them, not realizing we were living on a farm. And the next thing, we looked out the window and there's a huge fire outside, right? So it was like it wasn't extinguished. So it's like what you're saying, like there was more fuel there. And we thought there wasn't, so the fire rekindled itself.
Yes.
I don't know, that image came to mind as you were using the simile of the fire. So that was helpful. And yes, I just know that
a beautiful simile. And just to add to that, as the winds blew on your coals and rekindled it, so too the winds of the world keep rekindling our desires and our becoming, non-becoming, our greed, hatred, delusion. And that's why the Buddha says, even in the middle of a storm, the chitta must remain unmoving, untrembling, not swayed. So if by any chance there's still fuel, it doesn't get extra oxygen.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you. I love the way you described that at the end there too. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Lovely question. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Donna, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, if you have any comments about how this could be a little more helpful, if you'd like this structured in a different way, if you'd like anything changed, please feel free to send those comments to Nitya, and we'll try our best to incorporate your feedback before the next session. Okay, the idea is that this is as helpful as possible. This is what I envisioned in my own mind. This might not really sit well with everyone. So if you need anything changed, please let us know. Okay, Lynn has a question. Hi, Lynn.
Hello, how are you?
Good to see you.
I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. There was a lot in it, and I'm actually looking forward to listening to it again and looking up some of this, some of the references at some point. But I think I'm going to let the entire course take shape. But I'd also like to thank Janice. That was an excellent question. And because I've often thought of it as extinguished, and what happens when there is full enlightenment and there is extinguishment. So it was a beautiful question, and I appreciated your answers too. You referenced a few things there, so thank you. And I just wanted to say something, because the silence here in this body and mind has nothing to do with anything that was lacking in the presentation whatsoever, or anything that we need to do to enhance it more. It was just, I think there's some reflection as well on as to, how it affected me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn.
And I appreciate that.
That's also me fishing for compliments. That's just my own mana coming out.
There you go.
My own conceit.
It's wonderful. Gladly give it to you.
Thank you.
Amarasiri, if I may ask a final question.
Yes.
There's a lot to unpack in if you take any disciple. There are so many qualities that they exhibit, and so much to look up to and get inspired from. How do we? What's the best way to explore the life of a disciple? Do we pick up a certain quality and sit with that for some time, or what would your suggestion be?
Yeah, that really depends on the personality of the individual, right? Some individuals prefer a more analytical approach. Some individuals prefer a more emotional approach. I'm an emotional person. I prefer an emotional approach. I love stories. I think stories have these hidden hints and gems in them that we can really pick up and learn a lot from. And just as Venerable Sariputta says he was listening and all his cankers fell away, I think a good thing to do would just be to kind of listen and see what really speaks to one's heart, and then pick up on that and go with it. And the most important thing is to have the courage to apply this to your own individual set of constraints, your own individual way of practice, your own individual experience, whatever is evoked in your own heart. I think that's very important. So it's not as if a story is this kind of fixed thing there. Yes, a story is fixed, but then you can take it and you can really use it in your own consciousness and apply it in one's own heart and play around with it and see how it affects us. What are the feelings that it evokes? What do we find appealing? What do we find helpful? And different people find different things helpful. But yeah, play with it would be my encouragement.
Thank you, Amarasiri.
Great.
I think it's
Okay. So
almost time.
Yeah. So I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you all so much, and see you all next week.
Before we leave, I'll request the community to pay our respects to you by bowing 3 times.
Sukhi hotu, sukhi hotu, sukhi hotu. Okay. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nitya, as well.
Yeah.